Okay, it looks like we're live. Hello, everybody. So we have a little bit of technical difficulties here today. I was trying to do this on my phone app, which would have been a lot clearer and a lot easier. And for some reason, YouTube is just not cooperating with me right now. So I'm going to have to do this via my laptop here. Yeah, technology, right, Cheryl? Exactly. So I'll do as best as I can here. So I'm literally just holding the laptop in my hands here. So at some point I'm going to have to put it down and see if this works. And this may be all right. Let's see. Get your laptop to do the chat. Oh, okay. I think this is all right. Let me move a little. Gotta love Victorian tables with casters on them, huh? Victorians knew what they were doing. Now, the computer's far away from me. I cannot see the comments, but I have my handy dandy assistant. He is going to get his laptop and he is going to be handling comments and such like that and questions and all the above. So, welcome to my seminar, Cut Glass, Press Glass, How to Tell the Difference. I get a lot of people asking these questions. How do I tell the difference between cut glass and press glass? How do I tell the difference between European cut glass and European cut glass and American cut glass? These are questions you see on the glass boards a lot. So I thought I would do a seminar addressing that. And this is free and open to all. Feel free to share the link here with everybody that you feel might be interested in this. I am taking tips via PayPal, and my assistant will put the direct PayPal link there. It is also in the event listing on Facebook. If you don't do PayPal, you can also do Cash App, and that is through my email address, which again will be coming soon. We're going to be doing a drawing for one of the pieces here, and how we'll be handling that is make sure you include your email address. If you send something via PayPal, tip via PayPal or Cash App, there should be a notes section there that you can put your email address. You can also just email me directly with your email address. I will need your email address. We'll do the drawing, and I figure out what I will do is in 2 weeks from today, I will do another short live stream on a Sunday, probably about the same time. The details of that will be forthcoming, and I will do the drawing. It'll be by a person's name and email address, and then I will email you to ask what your mailing address is so that I can mail you the object, and we will get to all that shortly. All right, so let's get started. So cut glass, yes, okay. Conjures up ideas of grandeur and beauty and expensive things, cut glass, which, yes, that is absolutely true. That is what cut glass is all about. And it also conjures up images of ornate, something similar to this item, this cut glass bowl from the turn of the 20th century. We think of these fancy objects with cut glass, but cut glass wasn't always that fancy. So I'm actually going to start in the 19th century with cut glass. Yes, cut glass was around before then, but what is most accessible to us now that we may find in our hunts and travels is cut glass from the 19th century. So I will start off with that. So cut glass actually started off in the 19th century being very plain, not the ornate, very fancy stuff that I just showed you an example of there. This is an example of a 19th century piece of cut glass, and I will come a little bit closer here just so you can see this. And it may be hard on the monitor, but you can see it's quite plain. Star on the bottom. This is actually a very old. This is an early wine glass rinser, is what this is. And what you would do. Just take this for example. Wine glasses were small back then. They weren't the big water goblets people like to use today. They literally would have water in here, and they would set the wine glass in there, rinse it, and then you have it ready for your next course. So this is cut glass wine glass rinser, probably about 1840, 1850. So how do we tell that this is cut, especially when this is so plain? Okay. So remember, the things that I'm going to tell you today, the characteristics that define the cut glass from the pressed glass. Keep in mind that there are many factors involved, okay? That one factor alone is probably not going to help you determine every single piece that you have, okay? And the reason being because there's so many different eras of cut glass. There's so many different ways that they imitated the cut glass and the pressed glass that there's not one definitive method that is going to tell you. So I'm going to give you a bunch of methods and you combine these together and that will give you the knowledge to tell the difference between the pressed glass and the cut glass, as well as when we get into the European cut glass versus the American cut glass. Okay. So the first thing that we are looking for is a nice cut mitered surface. Look at the star on the base, okay? Should be a bit sharp to the touch, okay? You're looking at the points. Always look at the points and the miters on these things. And with cut glass, since it's done by hand, these points aren't always going to be exact. Now, symbol of quality, they should be pretty darn close, but look at where these points of this ray come together. I don't know if you can see that. They come together. You could see they all meet there, but they're not 100% exact. They're very, very close, but they're not exact. Oh, okay. All right. Well, we have to try to figure out how to. I don't think you should hold that up. I can do more of this type of thing, lean over the table. Okay, my assistant said you like to see more of my face. Why, thank you. Okay, so now let's compare that to a piece of pressed glass from the same era. And again, this was meant to imitate cut glass. It may be, hard for us to believe these days because again, we think of cut glass as being very, very ornate. But back in those days, cut glass was more plain. And it was meant to be plain because it showed the quality of the glass. It showed the quality of the cutting. If you have all these stars and everything all over the piece like this, which we will get to, just a myriad of patterns just jumping out at you, you really don't focus on the quality of the glass alone. You're looking at all the different patterns on it. But something like this, very, very plain. Now, this is pressed glass. And this is around the same date, about 1840, 1850. And it's a very similar type of pattern. But if we compare the cut to the pressed, we see that there are edges here. There's the sharp edges. There's seams here. You're going to want to look for seams. Not one seam on this at all. You're not going to see seams on cut glass. When you look very carefully, a lot of people say, well, this doesn't have any seams. Pressed glass will have seams, okay? You just got to look for them. You got to know where to look for them. Look for them on the base. A pattern like this, they hid the seams within the panels, okay? So if I look very, very closely at this and I look at the base, I see there's a seam here and I see there's a seam right across from it. So this is a two-part mold. The seam goes here, it goes all the way up here, and you don't see it up on the actual vessel because it's hidden in the pattern. Further thing that they did with the pressed glass to cover the seams was they fire polished it. That gave the glass a nice brilliance and it obscured the seams. Okay, so this would appear to be more cut. That actually has a nice ring because this is what we refer to as flint glass these days. It has lead in the glass. But if we listen to that, okay, and now we listen to the actual cut one. The cut one's going to ring more, right? Ooh, that's one thing that will confuse a lot of people. They will flick the glass and yeah, it's got a little bit of a ring, but look, very dissonant. Okay, and we ring this one. Oh, that's got to be cut glass. Again, you have to look at several different factors. Also look for the presence of annealing marks or shear marks. Okay, a lot of people call shear marks straw marks. Not a proper term. That's a fallacy. That's the glass when it came out of the mold was thrown on a bed of straw. Completely made up. We'll talk about that another time at a future seminar, pressed glass and early American pattern glass. But they are called shear marks, okay? We also see little squiggles in the glass, almost looks like little cuts in the glass. Those are annealing marks. You are not going to find that on cut glass because this blank was not molded. These blanks were blown, okay, and then cut. So you're not going to see straw marks, shear marks, or annealing marks on the cut glass. I see them on this one, even though this one rings better, quote unquote, than this one. This is pressed, this is cut. So that's the early glass. We have another example here of a pressed glass salt cellar. See if we can get that behind the dark. Yeah, a pressed glass salt cellar. Again, meant to imitate cut glass. Very, very plain. Kind of has a thunk. It's very thick and heavy. But again, let's look at the things I talked about. Seams. Look at the base. Feel first. And there's panels here, but I can feel right here. Keep going along, smooth, and I feel another one right there. There's the seams, another 2-part mold. So it would come up, you could follow along here. If you really look closely, it's been fire polished. So there's the seams. Let's keep going. Shear marks, annealing marks. Bunch of them on the inside. Very, very hard to see. I'm going to bring this up a little closer. Maybe we can get a little bit of that. See if I can get the light coming off of it. It doesn't look too. We have crinkles in here. There are little fissure-looking crinkly things in the bottom here. Those are called annealing marks, and that had to do when the glass was cooled. Again, you are not going to find that on cut glass. So right away, that tells us that this is pressed. Okay. So the early cut glass patterns were more what they called miter patterns. This is a miter diamond. Okay. Very, very hard to see, but miter diamond, planar patterns like I showed you, the paneled, and less ornate patterns. Okay, so let's move ahead a little bit. Let's go into say about the 1880s. Okay, and we as collectors hear people throwing about the term American Brilliant cut a lot. Okay, American Brilliant period, ABP glass. What does that mean? American Brilliant period. And you hear everybody talking about that as being, again, the very, very ornate, fancy, typical cut glass, something like that. And the general consensus is that this came about at the 1876 Centennial Exposition. Not saying that cut glass was not there, but it was not this style yet. Okay, this style with the hub stars and all the fancy diamonds and just designs just all over the place. Very, very, very high, late Victorian. Came about 20 years later. We'll talk about that in a bit. So let's look at some of the earlier brilliant cut patterns, which really 1880s. And the first one that really stands out is what we now call the daisy and button pattern. But back when it was created in the early 1880s, about 1882, it was patented. It was called Russian. Okay, and that is... Give an example of that here. Again, I hope it doesn't look too distorted. To me, I'm looking on this, it looks kind of distorted. When I was on my camera, it looked very, very clear. But it is your typical, quote unquote, collector's term daisy and button pattern. So we have the button, and then we have the daisies, okay? This one is cut. This is a cut daisy and button or Russian pattern rose bowl, okay? We'll get to the characteristics between the cut and the press in a minute. And then we also have a very nice Russian pattern water goblet. People like to use these for wine glasses now. It's about 8 or 9 ounces. That was a water goblet back in those days. Wine glasses were much smaller, about 2 to 3 ounces. And at some point, trying to determine when this was, probably the 60s or 70s, 1960s, 1970s, people began to use the water goblets as wine goblets. Okay, so now we have big, massive wine glasses. Okay, they were meant for water back in those days. So these are cut examples of the daisy and button pattern. So we can always do the flick test. Really very, very, very good resonance. Same thing with the rose bowl. Very high pitched ring. Now by this period, we don't have to worry that if this is American pressed glass, it's not going to have lead in the glass. So we're not going to get that high pitched bell ring with pressed American glass at that period. Okay, so let's look at another one. This is in the Russian, quote unquote, daisy and button pattern. Clonk, clonk. Okay, that's a good indication, first of all. But the big tip off here is that the pattern may look the same, but it is colored, the colored glass. You are typically not going to see cut glass that is a solid color. Okay, we'll get to some color techniques in cut glass in a bit, but a solid color you are typically not going to see in cut glass. I have seen some examples, they do exist, but as a general rule, transparent colors, I automatically think pressed. Okay, then you start to look for seams, we look for sharp edges and such like that. Now, one of the things people like to say is, well, cut glass is sharp and pressed glass is not sharp. This is pressed, it's pretty darn sharp to the touch. So again, not always the best indication. You can use it in conjunction with the other things, but I tend to not like to use that cut as sharp and pressed as dull, because there's a lot of pressed glass that is as sharp or even sharper than cut glass. Okay, so that in that instance, it's the color that really tells us. Again, same things as before. We have all of these little points, the stars and the little octagons, the buttons there, and look at them very, very closely. And each side of the octagon should be just a tiny bit different. Your points compare. Look at the repeated motifs. Okay, so we have a fan up here.
Can't really see that. Get closer.
Okay. So we have fans up here at the top. Okay. The fans come to a point. Compare this fan to the next, okay? They all should be just a tiny, tiny bit different. Again, the higher the quality of the cut glass, the more precise the miters are going to be. Look at the buttons and look at the size of the button. They're not going to be 100% equal when you compare this button to the next button to the next button. They're going to be a little bit different. When it's pressed glass, those motifs are going to be exact because those were made in a mold. The molds are chipped. Very, very tedious, very, very exact process to chip a mold for something like this, and I'll show it closer in a moment. Could have taken a month, literally, of full work days to chip a very complex mold like this. But they were so precise with these things. So again, we're going to look at the same things. We're going to look at the stars. We're going to look at the buttons. And if you look very, very closely, these are all going to be the same. The stars within the buttons are all going to be uniform, and they're going to be exact from one to the next. Okay. So those are the things you're looking for. You're looking for slight irregularities, very, very slight differences in the repeated motifs. Look at the same motif though. So if you're looking at a hop star, that hop star is going to repeat somewhere in that pattern. Look at the next sequence of pattern, compare it to the last one. And if you see little differences and you see points that don't exactly line up, think cut. Okay. So another pattern in the 1880s that was very, very popular was called the Harvard cutting. And a lot of people nowadays call it cane. Okay, that's the collector's name. But back in those days, it was called Harvard. So we have two examples here. And this is another good example of why we shouldn't use the thought that cut glass is sharp and pressed glass is not. But let's look at them first as for what they are. So we have the handle here, these handles. If you have a pitcher in cut glass, those handles are going to be applied. They are not going to be molded handles. So what we want to first do is we want to see if there's a mold seam going along the edge of the handle, and there is not. Now, some handles that are pressed glass, they obscure the mold seams. They fire polish them. So we really want to look at the top and the bottom of this handle to see that it is applied. And there's just a little blop of glass there. It's not completely even. Okay, I'm pretty sure that this is an applied handle. Great. Okay, we continue to look. We'll look at the design. Again, we're talking about geometric designs. Look at these octagons here. And are they exactly the same from one to the next? And I see that this side is a little shorter than this side. I see that this side is a little shorter than this side on the octagon. I see the top is a little longer than that top. Okay, irregularities in the pattern, most likely cut. Oh, so I'm going to look at this other one. Very similar pattern based on the Harvard cutting. Now I'm going to do the feeling test. This one's really sharp and this one's not. Okay, well, let's just kind of keep that in mind. We have an applied handle here. No seam. I can tell it's applied. I'm looking at the top. There's little imperfections in the handle because it's applied. This is done by hand. Okay, still could be pressed, still could be cut. But I'm also looking for mold seams. I see some mold seams on the bottom. Okay, we know that this is pressed. There are mold seams on this, but this one is a lot sharper than this one. So we have a piece of pressed glass that to the touch is sharper than cut glass. How could that be? Trust me, when they made these things, it was an indication back then too. People knew that cut glass was sharp. Pressed glass technically wasn't. They strove to make these pressed imitations as close to cut as possible. So that pattern is very sharp. You touch that, oh, that must be cut. How did they get this so smoothed out? It was through polishing. It was polishing of the miters. Okay. So cut glass was cut on wheels. Okay. It was also polished on wheels. Okay. They would either do it with cork or they would do it with wood. They would polish. Later on, they started using acid, and acid makes it smooth out the cuts even more. Okay. This one's early enough to probably not have been done by acid, but they polish it out very well. It's a more shallow cutting. This one it's molded in very, very high relief. Okay. So the point was to make the pressed imitations as close to the cut originals as they can. It was all about keeping up with the Joneses. It was all about this status of having cut glass. In fact, if you look at some of the old catalogs and some of the old Sears and Montgomery Ward catalogs, they show a set of pressed glass. And they say if this were the true article, if this really were cut glass, the picture alone would be worth $20. But we have made the manufacturing techniques such that we can offer this at such a low price. It was the appeal was not in the object itself. It was in what the object pretended to be. And they further even want to say your neighbors will pronounce it genuine cut glass. And that's what it was all about. If you had that cream pitcher sitting on your buffet, you had guests over, you had it sitting on your tea table, your guests would think that was cut glass, and that was what was desired. That was what was wanted. So we're in the 1880s over here. Let's come into the 1890s now. And a very popular pattern in the early 1890s was what they referred to back then as strawberry diamond. And you hear some people calling that now as well. And I'm going to come up closer to show you this pattern. So strawberry diamond, this is just a pure strawberry diamond pattern here. Okay, it doesn't have any other design motifs on it. It's diamonds. And then within the diamonds, each diamond is quartered. There's an X in each. Well, I want it against the dark. Can you see it okay? Yeah. Okay. So we have diamonds with an X within each diamond, which makes 4 diamonds within the one large diamond. Okay. So here's a cruet. The cruet is not going to have a seam on it. Okay. Because even pressed glass cruets, they were pressed upside down. Anything with a narrow neck that was pressed upside down. You had a big flap of glass up here. And then that glass was gathered in and it was warmed in, and then the excess was cut. They call that a cut shut base. Okay. Well, let's look what we have here. You're going to see a little dimple. People call it a ponto mark, but it's a little dimple on cut shut. That'll be another seminar. But here, let's look at this. There's no dimple. There's no ponto mark, quote unquote, no cut shut mark. We have a star. This is cut. You'd have to, if this was pressed, cut shut, there would be no design here. We also have a very nice cut and polished base here. If you can see the reflection there, it's very reflective. But more importantly, let's look at the design. We're talking about a geometric design here again. We have diamonds and we have X's within the diamonds, and you may not be able to see this there, but I'm looking here, and as these diamonds are getting smaller down here, they're getting a little more uneven. It's almost like when you're wallpapering a room. You know, if you start off in the corner and you're exactly precise, and let's say you're just off 1/8 of an inch, no big deal. But the next strip is off a 1/4 of an inch. The next strip is off a whole inch. And by the time you get around the room, your wallpaper's all wonky. It's the same thing with this. Okay, so look for the irregular cuts. That is cut. So let's look at a pressed imitation of the strawberry diamond pattern. This is actually made by Toronto Glass Company, about 1894. This is their Virginia pattern. And we have the same type of design. We have the big diamond, the smaller diamonds with the cut, with the X within the middle of the diamonds. can't make it out. Yeah, it's very hard to see. Is that better?
Can you get closer?
Well, I'm afraid if I get too close, it'll be blurry. There we go. How's that?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. So you can see the large diamonds, and you can see they're quartered, and there's 4, which creates 4 small diamonds within. And I can see this in person. Every single one of those X's is precise. And then we compare it to the next repeat of the design. They are exact. And what's one of the other indications that I mentioned before? Transparent, the fully colored glass. This wine glass is green. That's not cut glass. It looks really good, but it's not cut glass, and it's much more precise than the actual cut item. Okay. All right, so that is the strawberry diamond. And let's talk about, so we mentioned cut, and we mentioned colored. They don't go together, but now we have a vase here that has a green top. It has some green highlights here. Well, let's determine whether or not this is cut or pressed. So it's colored in part, could be pressed, but let's talk about some of the other characteristics we were looking at with the other ones. We have stars here. I'll bring this closer. I'll bring this one along with it. Again, they're geometric designs. They're all geometric. There's lots of stars, lots of fans. Okay, there we go. And if we look very, very close at these things, look at the points where the stars come together. Look at the distance between the rays of the star here. Okay, and now we're going to find the repeat of the design. And there's the repeat of the design. You're going to see little differences here. The distance between these rays is going to be slightly, ever so slightly different than this one here. And if you look closely where these points come together, they might not, every single point might not come together exactly in the center. Okay? Be the same thing with these fans here, where they come to where the points meet. Look where the points meet. And then we compare it to the next repeat. There's going to be some very, very slight differences. Okay? That's cut. Okay, now compare it to this one. Very similar type pattern. These are called trumpet vases. Back in the 1890s, this form was very, very popular. They called them bouquets. Simply bouquets, not bouquet vases. Sometimes they might have said vase, but they just refer them as a bouquet.
Kathy would like to know, is all cut glass called crystal?
Is all cut glass called crystal? It depends on your definition of crystal. Crystal means many different things. I'll just interject for a second. Crystal means many different things. Crystal can mean clear glass. It has nothing to do with the quality of it. It's just the lack of color in the glass. That is referred to as crystal. Okay, the glass companies use that term crystal. That was to compare it to actual crystal. That is a natural element found in nature. Okay, because of the clarity of something, it's crystal. Okay, so in that respect, crystal could be just any of this glass here. Crystal also refers to a quality of glass, which is a more modern use of the term. So when we would say lead crystal, that more describes it. There's actually lead in the glass. That would be also called crystal. So it depends on your definition of it. If you're talking about clear glass, this is crystal. If you're talking about glass with a high lead content, this is also crystal. Keep in mind that that's a more modern term when we say crystal, meaning a quality of glass. Okay. So if we compare this vase to the other one, this trumpet vase or bouquet, again, we have a lot of geometric designs here, a lot of X's and such like that. Look at the points, look at where the designs meet. That's really the best way to do it. Exactly perfect, precise. Now let's also look and see where the design repeats. This X is exactly the same as this one, which is exactly the same as all of them. Okay, this is pressed. Let's continue further and let's look for seams. This one's a hard one to see seams on. Remember, they hid the seams within the pattern. They fire polished, so it's very, very hard to see the seams. They also flared this by hand, which obscures the mold lines. Let's look on the base. The base is the best indication of finding seams. Use your hands. I feel them right here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 seams. So there's a seam. Turn it this way. The seams are on the top. okay? But there's a seam that goes right like an X here. You can feel them. It's a little harder to see them because of fire polishing, but I can feel those seams. And once I feel them, then I can look at them a little closer. I see the seams. That is pressed. We could do the flick test too. Again, that test alone is not determined. But of all the factors we talked about, now we've determined that this one is pressed and this one is cut. And as I mentioned, they went to great lengths to make this imitation pressed glass look like cut. They even copied some of the patterns identically, exactly to the cut glass. And this is one pattern here that they copied exactly. So this is made by Westmoreland Glass Company. They just gave it a number. They call it number 228. People call it Atlanta now. This is an exact copy of a cut glass design. And if you just look at that, that looks pretty darn good. Your house and you see this, that looks like cut glass. But again, look at it a little closer. What's the first thing we want to look at? Well, we can do the ding test. Pretty dull. All right, let's look for seams, okay? And I can literally see the seams. They hit them in the pattern though. See, the seam goes right through here, right through here. So since we have seams going this way, let's see if the seams go the other way too. And there they do. So this is a 4-part mold. We have the seams there, so we can definitely tell right away this is pressed glass. Let's look at another one that's not quite as easy to determine. This is another pattern by Westmoreland. Okay, right. So that one had four seams on it, 4-part mold. We look at this one, I don't see any seams. They hid the seams in the pattern. Okay, so let's look at the base. It's got a very small base here, but we can run our fingers around it, and I feel a seam right here. I feel a seam there. I feel a seam right there. Look where that coincides with. 1 seam, 2 seams. See it, okay? Which brings me just to another aside here, the number of mold seams. People tend to think that earlier glass has less mold seams. And that's not an accurate determination. So we see that these two plates from right around the same time period, about 1905, this one has 3 mold seams, that one has 4. It has to do with the pattern, the repeat of the pattern. They were able to hide the mold seams here. We have 3 of these fern bursts here. That's where we're going to put the seam, okay? And then on the other one, we have 4 of this motif here. Let's hide the seams there because the seams will be a lot more visible here. We have a lot more blank space, okay? So we're going to put the seam where there's a lot of heavy pattern. 4-part mold. Doesn't have anything to do with the age. All right, let's continue. So we're in the 1890s now. And we'll compare these two, talking about the different characteristics. All right, so we have a lot of stars here. First thing I would do is I would look at the, yeah, a lot of people say the weight, okay, but the weight of this is good. It's very, very shiny and brilliant. Okay, that's great. But a lot of pressed glasses too, depends on who made it. Higbee glass was a very, very good quality. So you're going to see a very, very brilliant finish on Higbee. You're going to see a lot of ground bottoms. So that's not always going to be a determining factor. But what I look at with a piece like this, look at the miters, look at the points, look at where the points meet, and then compare the motifs, this to this. Look at the repeats. And this star should not be identical to that star, nor to identical to that star. They're very, very close, but they are not going to be perfectly exact. Okay, and if I look at that, I see they are not. And this is a high quality piece. It's a piece by Hawks. It is signed. You will never be able to see this here. It's hard enough to see in person. When looking for signatures on cut glass, a lot of people say hold it up to the light. That's the worst thing you can do because the light's coming through it. All you're seeing is the pattern. What you want to do is you want to get it so that the light, I'm not going to be able to, yeah, okay, like that. You're going to want it where the light reflects off the piece. And when you're closer to it, you might need a loop, you might need a magnifying glass, bifocal, such. Look in the middle. Most cut glass would be signed in the middle. There are stories of cut glass being signed and just like a little miter on the back, a little point. I don't know if I've ever come across that. Sometimes you will find a partial signature, but most of it, if it's signed, is going to be in the middle. And a very small percentage of cut glass is signed. A very small percentage of any glass is signed. Keep that in mind as well. And also to reiterate, A signature on glass doesn't always necessarily denote the highest quality. There are a lot of unsigned pieces of glass that are very high quality, pressed and cut. Let's look at another piece. Very, very similar plates. The plate is a similar size, similar pattern, very, very ornate. And I don't see any seams on this whatsoever. It's hard to see within the pattern, but I don't see any seams one bit, okay? But we look again at the points. We look at the repeated motifs. They are identical. This is pressed. And if I look further, I hold it in the light, let the light glare off it. There is a signature that says press cut, molded. That is McKee's press cut. This is their Fentech pattern. It's very sharp. It's actually sharper than the cut. So remember, caveat with the thinking that the pressed glass is smooth and the cut glass is sharp. This is a perfect example. This one is very sharp. I mean, you can almost cut yourself on it. It's so sharp. Okay. So moving ahead, we'll just kind of just compare some more of them. Similar patterns of relish dishes here. Back in those days, they call them pickle dishes generally. So we have this pattern here. And then we have this pattern here. And if you were in person, think about what the first thing you would do. Look at all the little points. Look at the preciseness of the miters and everything. This one is absolutely precise. The edges, another thing I didn't talk about, the edges on the pressed glass, they're going to be a little more rounded. They were fire polished, a little more rounded. The edges on the cut glass are going to be generally a bit more sharp, which is, we can do the flick test if we want. Very gently. And then we have this one. Let's see what this one's like. Clunk. Now, cut glass can clunk if there's a crack in it. Okay. But if that resonates very, very well, as it does, we look at the miters, we look at all that, we determine that this one is cut glass. So those are really the best ways to look at it. Yes.
A couple questions about terminology. What is elegant glass? Is that cut? What is rock crystal?
Okay.
And someone would also like you to talk about Waterford. Is it pressed or cut?
Okay. We have some questions. Elegant glass. We have questions about rock crystal, and we have questions about what's the last one? Waterford. Okay, we'll get to Waterford. Okay, because I actually have some examples of that here. So we will get to that in a bit. Let's talk about elegant glass first. Elegant glass can encompass a lot of different things. Okay, so we look at terms. I look at terms two different ways. I look at terms that originated from the manufacturers themselves, the terms that were around in the era in which the glass was made, and then we also look at the terms that collectors have coined over the years. They're two completely separate things. Okay, the terms that collectors come up with are very, very often subjective. They're created terms. They're terms that somebody came along and wanted to categorize something. So human beings like to put things in categories, right? We like to make sense of things by categorizing things. We put like things together. Early American pattern glass, cut glass, satin glass, depression glass, elegant glass. Okay, so elegant glass is an umbrella term for the finer quality glass that was made during the Depression years. And I put that in quotes, okay, because terms that are created, being subjective, sometimes there's different interpretations of them. And as time goes on and things become older and more antique and people start noticing them and collecting them more, sometimes those things become lumped into the older collector's terms. And elegant glass is one of those, okay? So it is a subjective term, but it was originally coined, and I believe it was Gene Florence, because he started writing books on elegant glassware of the Depression era. Hazel Weatherman, she did not use the term elegant glass at all. It was all Depression to her, okay? Whether it was Fostoria, finer glass. So elegant glassware, as coined by Gene Florence and in his books, was based on the finer quality glass made during around the years just before and after the Depression era. So you're talking 1920s to roughly the 1940s. Of course, it continued. Okay, styles didn't just change overnight. Okay, types of glass did not change overnight. Popularity did not change overnight. Okay, and it refers to that the glassware that was as opposed to machine made, it was handmade. It had a finer quality. It was generally sold in department stores and jewelry stores rather than the five and dime. But again, there's exceptions to that too. Know with any of this, everything that I'm telling you here, everything that I just talked about there, nothing is 100%. There's always, and there's the term, always, there's going to be an exception to the rules as we create them, as we see them. There's going to be a piece of cut glass that falls outside the quote unquote rules, even the guidelines that I'm giving you. That's just how it is. So keep all that in mind. Okay. So Waterford we will get to, and rock crystal. We'll talk about that right now because I have examples here, and that was actually part of the presentation as well. So this is what is referred to as a rock crystal cutting. Okay. So again, what is rock crystal? Rock crystal is it's crystal in the form of a rock. It's something that occurs in nature. The fact that we're applying it to glass has to do with trying to make a comparison through something beautiful in nature to something man-made that is very crystal clear and good quality. This is probably very, very hard to see. But a rock crystal cutting, rock crystal generally refers to a cutting, okay, a type of cutting. And this is a cutting. It's not an etching, but what it is, it's a cutting that is very detailed and very shallow relief, and it's polished out. Okay, so you can see, is that showing? Not really. I think I want to put a dark little background behind this. Maybe this will be better. How's that? A little better? It's hard for these things to show up. Keep that in mind. But it's a very shallow cutting, very detailed cutting, and it's polished out. This one has an excellent ring to it. This is what we would call a rock crystal cutting. This is actually cut. Here's another one I will show you that's cut. And again, same things we can look for. We can look for irregularities and patterns, such like that. Here's another one. This is a rock crystal. I'd say rock crystal type cutting. Okay. Maybe you can see that. Again, a lot of little lacy designs, delicate flowers, delicate swags, delicate cartouches, stuff like that. There's even on the base, it's even cut on the base. But the rock, in order to qualify as a rock crystal cutting, it has to be polished out. This has to be all polished. Now let's look at some imitations. Okay.
What do you mean by polished out?
Polished out. That means when this is cut into the glass, the pattern is gray, and I'll show you an example of that here. This is a good comparison. So this is a cutting. This is a light cutting. A rock crystal cutting is a light cutting, an intricate light cutting that is polished out. It's not left in the gray. Now, left in the gray is a glass term. Left in the gray is this. Yes, you can use a copper wheel for that. It's done on wheels. Notice how that cutting, it stands out a lot more, doesn't it? Because not just because it's larger, because it's gray. There's more contrast. These cuts were not polished out. Now, if these cuts were polished out, we might call it a rock crystal cutting. I personally would think it's not quite ornate enough. I would have to see just a little bit more laciness. These leaves are a little big, but it's close, okay? But this is what it means left in the gray. That's not polished out. Going back to the rock crystal cuttings are polished out. So it's harder to see. There's no gray in this. You see all of the brilliance of the glass in the cutting. Now let's look at a pressed imitation of a rock crystal cutting. This was actually even called rock crystal. That shows up even much better. Very, very similar pattern to the other ones, right? But this is pressed. It's much heavier, very clunky, but on its own, it really looks a lot like it. But we do the same things. What is the test on this? We're going to look to make sure that the flowers, all the stems, everything are perfectly the same. They are. We don't have geometric designs on this, so we're not looking for points coming together. But let's look for the seams. Go to the base. Seam. There's 4 seams here. And you can see, then we follow it up. They come up the stem. And you see they follow right along lines. Again, they tried to hide the seams within the pattern. But you could tell this one's sharper than this. So that's a 4-part mold, McKee's rock crystal pattern. Here's another example of a rock crystal type design. Right away, you know that this is pressed because it's colored. You're not going to have transparent pink glass in a rock crystal type of cutting, okay? But you can see that it's the same type of cutting, same type of design. This is not cutting, okay? We can look for the seams too, and the seams are there. Rock crystal cuttings like that were very popular, starting in the 1890s, but really towards the early 1900s, they became really popular. So popular that McKee in 1908 made their rock crystal cutting pattern, to imitate the rock crystal cutting. Okay, and like I said, they even called the pattern rock crystal. Okay, let's go back. So we're getting into more modern. Okay, we've seen the differences. I'll just kind of briefly show you some beautiful berry bowls here. So these are berry bowls. These are very, very popular as wedding gifts. These were very often put on a mirrored plateau with the silver plated base, and you have the light coming through this. You get a lot of shine. Here's a word of warning. It's beautiful to display things like that, and by all means do, but make sure you don't have this in direct sunlight. Okay, now pressed glass will the pressed glass that has manganese dioxide in it. It was a decolorant agent to make the glass nice and clear. Otherwise, the glass would kind of have like a greenish hue that was inherent in the batches of clear glass. That glass will end up turning kind of like a light lavender or purple. Most people have probably seen that. Cut glass won't do that. Okay, lead glass won't do that. This will not do that. But what can happen is the sun reflects off all of these miters. It gets pretty hot. You literally could have a bowl crack in half. I've heard that happening, shattering from the mirrored plateau underneath it, even with the sun rays coming. So be very, very careful about having any cut glass in direct sun. Okay. So we have a nice berry bowl there. We have another one here, very intricate. And then we have another one. Now, on the screen, they might look all about the same, but clunk, clunk, clunk. Not even going to go further than that. Nicer ring. And, again, we're going to look at all the things I showed before. Look for the seams. Very, very hard to see seams on this. Look for all the points. Look for the regularity of the pattern. Look at the repeats. They're exact, pressed. Okay. These are cut. All the points are just a little bit different. Okay. One point I do want to bring up about these is that.
Can you repeat about the glass turning purple?
Yes, repeating about the glass turning purple as soon as I make this point. So these were popular wedding gifts, as I said, for the more affluent people. Okay, we see these bowls at estate sales and thrift stores these days, and most of them are going to have some teeth completely gone, some of the little points on the edge completely gone, or at least flaked or chipped. And it's just, again, the glass is very fragile. It was as fragile back then as it is now. So really, really be careful with these. Even if you knock it, sometimes you'll get a chip on it. A bowl like this, brand new, in today's money, say about this dates from about 1905, was about $250 to $300 average. You had even higher quality ones. You had ones with more intricate cuttings, something like this one. But a dish like this, a small dish with an intricate cutting, something like this would have been close to $50 to $100 back then, brand new. A bowl like this, $250 to $300 and up. And when you see something like this at a thrift store with no chips, and it's $10, I mean, if this is your thing, buy it. It's just crazy. So somebody wanted me to talk a little bit more about the sun colored glass, and this is overlapping with another seminar that I'm going to do specifically about pressed glass and different areas about pressed glass. Okay, so as I mentioned before, if you do care to drop me a tip in my virtual tip jar on PayPal, very, very much appreciated. I can also take Cash App, but make sure you put your email addresses in there, because also with those email addresses, I won't use them for anything other than to let you know of future seminars that I'm going to give. A lot of collectors may have overlapping interests, right? You might be interested in the cut and press glass, but a lot of people like other things as well. So just very briefly, I'll just say right now that due to it was manganese, it was the element manganese dioxide that they put in clear glass at a certain time period, which is roughly, and I stress this, very roughly from about, in the United States, from about 1870 with the soda lime formula, it's soda lime glass they did this with, to roughly right before World War I, and a lot of things became more expensive and scarce, and they kind of stopped using it. But that is not to say that any glass that has the purplish cast to it dates before World War I, because they used it later. It depends on the glass company. Okay, so that's about all for now on that, but I will talk more about that when we do a future seminar. Okay, so just want to show you just some examples of just really, pretty things that are pressed, and talk about the different companies who made the pressed glass. So we have a little rose bowl here that this was actually made by Cambridge Glass Company. Can you see that okay? Maybe I should get the... This was made by Cambridge Glass Company around 1905. There we go. And Cambridge liked to give numbers to their patterns in the 2000 sequence, okay? Sometimes they gave names to them as well, but that's Cambridge. Each one of these companies like to use their own little trademark. And after a while, towards the teens, it became a popular thing to have a trade name for your imitation cut glass. So this one we talked about before, this McKee. McKee used the trademark press cut on their glass. When people hear press cut, they think of the anchor hocking stuff that used to be given away in grocery stores and such in the 60s and 70s, okay? But earlier, right around 1904, 1905, and into the teens, they had their line of the imitation pressed glass that they called press cut. And a lot of pieces are marked, not every single one is. Cambridge's mark was near cut. And I don't think you're going to be able to see it, but this one, this is their Marjorie pattern. It actually says near cut in the base, and you can feel it. So use your sense of touch to feel for marks on the inside of the glass. Ohio Flint Glass Company used the term crystal, Krystol. Okay, and then later that a lot of their patterns were adopted by Jefferson Glass Company. So a lot of these patterns, the imitation cut patterns, are marked crystal. Okay. United States Glass Company, their line of imitation cut. Now, this was not until about 1915, so you can see how long the popularity of these things lasted. Theirs was art cut, all in capital letters, art cut. Let's see, who else did we have? So we had McKee did a lot of it. We had United States Glass Company, Cambridge's near cut. I know there's others. My brain is just kind of right now. If I think of more, I'll let you know. But again, keep in mind, if you find a raised mark on the inside of something, it's going to be pressed glass, okay? So let's talk about, we're getting a little more modern here, getting towards the end, okay? So remember, what was the intent? The intent was for people to believe that this was cut. That was not the only advantage. The other advantages to this too was that, and this is directly quoted from period sources that I looked into, trade journal reports and advertisements and other things. It wasn't just the appeal of having cut glass, but you could have cut glass, something that looked like cut glass, and it'd be much more durable. So, like I said, this was as fragile 125 years ago as it is now. So, this sat on the sideboard, big mirrored sideboards back in those days. You're displaying these things, but on good occasions, special occasions. Springtime was berry time. It was special, okay? Have, fresh berries. It's not like today we just go to the grocery store and pick them up any time of year. Springtime came, you had berries. You'd serve it in this berry bowl with a fancy berry spoon, okay? But you had to be very, very careful. This was not everyday stuff. This wasn't even every other week stuff, okay? This was very special occasion.
Is it because it's softer so you can cut it?
Yes, thank you. The glass has lead in it. Glass with lead in it is softer. Okay, the lead strengthens it. Lead makes it durable, makes it brilliant, but it also makes it a little bit softer so it's able to be cut. Okay, so you can have a bowl that looks very similar to that with all these fancy cuttings on it. And not only is it much more inexpensive, but it's durable. This isn't going to break and chip and crack as easily as that is. So that was another advantage in those days of why you should have pressed glass instead of cut glass. So guess what that ended up doing? Degrading the status of cut glass. If all the masses have things that look like cut glass but really aren't, and you go into somebody's house and you can't tell whether it's cut or pressed, why should we pay $250 for a berry bowl? So things started to change a bit. The original intent was to make it look cut, the pressed glass to make it look cut, but then we started to have things like this. Okay. Imperial Glass Company made a lot of these imitation cut patterns, and that's another trademark, new cut, N-U-C-U-T. You'll see on the base of a lot of their clear glass pieces. They registered that trademark about 1911. They started making their new cut line. But at any rate, so here is a imitation cut pattern. Looks like cut glass, but well, we know right away it's not cut. There's another one. We got to even examine the pattern. Why? Because it's iridescent. It's quote unquote carnival glass. They called this ruby gold back in those days. That's what imperial trade name for their quote unquote marigold carnival glass. So now we have, and these were very popular. Imperial excelled at these things. These imitation cut patterns, some of them were patterns they introduced prior to when Carnival glass came out. Imperial started making Carnival glass in 1909. So some of these patterns were earlier. They dated about 1906, 7, 8. And then they started to iridize them or dope them. Dope was the original term for spraying iridescent salts on these things. So now we have these imitation cut patterns. They look like cut glass. And if it was clear, we might wonder if it's cut glass. But now we have it in these vibrant rainbow colors. Some of them were also purple, smoke colored, and such like that. There's no question, and people at the time would have known this was not cut glass. This actually became a style unto itself, and other companies imitated this. So you have a pressed imitation of something cut, and then you have an imitation of an imitation. I just think that's pretty fun. Okay, so I'm just going to go through the rest here, and then we'll have a little wrap up. And if there's any more questions, then I will address those. So people refer to the very, very fancy ornate patterns as American Brilliant period. Great, okay. But things started to change after the turn of the century, okay. And then we started seeing things like this, okay. And this is cut. And what we have here is a combination of the geometric. This is a variation of the Harvard pattern. I mentioned before. I'm going to grab that cloth in here. Need that. So we have the Harvard cutting up on top, so the geometric design. And again, we can look at this and see that there's irregularities in the pattern. We know that it's cut, and it's at the base too. But then look what we have here. We have a floral cutting, okay? A little bit of wheat, a lot of flowers. And there is the flower left in the gray, okay? So when you're looking at cut glass, when we get to the difference between the European and American, I'm going to be talking about this gray cut again. So I'll just hold that thought for a second. But notice the gray cut on the flower, but everything else is polished out. Everything else is very brilliant. It's almost similar to a rock crystal cutting, isn't it? But we have the gray cut here. So this technically is not a rock crystal cutting. Rock crystal cuttings, again, are usually done on very thin, delicate glass, usually, okay? This is very, very heavy and substantial, okay? So this was after 1900, right around 1905, very popular into even the 1920s. The term that I like to use for that is the floral period, okay? There was an author of cut glass many years ago. I think her name was Louise Bogus, something like that. She seemed to be a pretty good authority on cut glass, real old school. And she referred to it as the floral period. And I like that. I like that term, the floral period. So the earlier floral period, like this, right around 1905, 1910 perhaps, you're going to have the vestiges of the American Brilliant period. You're going to have the geometric, fancy geometric bands and designs, but then you're going to have this more sparse floral cutting. And some of the later ones then, you're not going to have these fancy bands at the top, maybe towards the 20s. You're going to have just a completely floral cut picture. You might have some diamonds, but they're going to be a lot more plain, okay? So it didn't take very long before the pressed glass manufacturers decided to imitate that. And why? They knew that's where the market was. The money was there. So, of course, they made pressed imitations of that. And that's what we have right here. So here's a vase made by United States Glass Company. Very similar to the other one. We have the band up at the top here, the geometric band. We have the floral cutting here, and I'll get to that in a moment. And it looks very much like the other one, but this one is pressed glass. And we can use all the factors that I told you before. Look for the seams, look for the, everything. This is pressed. I'll just tell you it's pressed. But what United States Glass Company did, they did something pretty clever. And I don't know if this will come up. Maybe it will. If you look at that flower, there we go. See the line, there's lines on the flower, those are cut. See the anther and the little bits in between? Those are pressed. So you got little pressed bits and then little cut bits around it to really make it appear like it was completely cut. So if somebody came along here in 1910, 1915 and did this little test, oh, this is cut. It's sharp. Well, yeah, the highlights are cut. These highlights on the flower, these highlights up here are cut. McKee did the same thing. They did a line of what they called innovation cut glass. Well, it was pressed. It wasn't allowed to say it was cut. It was cut. So they went with that. Cut glass. They didn't say imitation cut glass. They didn't say press with cut highlights. They said innovation line of cut glass. It was cut. They just failed to mention that it wasn't fully cut. It confused people then. It confuses people now. Okay. So again, take all of the factors together to assess whether it's fully cut like this or whether it's pressed. And again, we can do that. It sounds a little clunky, but there's a ring to it. But this one, you're talking about clunk versus clunk. Clunk, clunk, clunk. Very heavy and clunky. If you're in person, you can really see the edges of this are just, the leaves are all pressed. They're very, very smooth. And some of them are not actually even very well molded, to be honest with you. Okay. So now let's continue on to more modern and European cut glass as opposed to American Brilliant period cut glass. Questions like this abound. How do I tell the difference between American Brilliant and something that's European? And most people, a lot of people confuse the European cut glass for the American Brilliant cut glass. And I will give you some pointers on that. Okay. So we talked about gray, things being left in the gray before. Cuttings that were not polished out. I should kind of stay over here telling you that. Cuttings that were not polished out. So we're talking about flowers. Okay. So during the American cut glass, in this floral period, the flowers are going to be left in the gray, but our geometric patterns should be polished out. Okay. With the European cut glass, they polished some of it out, but there's going to be geometric designs that were left in the gray. Okay, let's look at that for a moment. So here we have actually this is a very nice example of European cut glass. And this may date from, it's hard to date this stuff because a lot of this was meant for giftware. This is imported, obviously. It was meant for giftware. So some of this actually dates to the 1940s, 50s. You find these things in magazines and such at the time. They were selling, European crystal and European cut glass. And some of it was in the 70s, 80s, and 90s even. The quality will vary, but you could see very, very well right there. What's the first thing you see? You see a star, but what stands out? The gray points. These points are all gray. And the center is gray. You need the background to really see that. So those diamonds, that file type of design is left in the gray, as we say. The rest of it is polished out. Okay. Some of these were completely cut. Some of them, just like the United States Glass Company stuff, and the McKee innovation, some of them, the big parts of the designs were molded, and then they just kind of cut the highlights on it. And it's not like they took their cue from, the earlier stuff from companies like McKee and United States Glass Company and even Duncan and Miller. But that's what we look for. We look for gray cutting on the geometric patterns, the geometric designs. That's the important part. Geometric. Because if we look for the gray cutting on the floral, this is American. The geometric design does not have the gray cut on it. So that is really your determining factor on whether it's cut European or if it's cut American. Now let's look just a little further on this. Some of the European is also signed as well. So you want to look, the same inner surface. So let's take a look at this one. And you can clearly see, look at those gray areas that I don't know, to me, even for me on this screen here, they just pop out. These are little tiny hop stars, little diamonds, little file points, and they were all left gray. This is completely cut, but they only polished out part of it. The tiny little designs, they left gray. Another thing that's a bit characteristic is if you notice, look at the points here. There we go. There's a lot of little tiny points very, very close to each other, and they're they're pretty pointy too. They really come to a point like a triangle. You're generally not going to see that on the American cut glass. The edges on American cut glass are going to be not quite as, and let's look at this one. This is smaller. They're going to be a little larger. They're not going to be quite as pointy. So this is an old piece of American Brilliant. They look, it's hard to tell. It looks pointy there, but look how few of them there are, though. They're not these tiny little sharp teeth, okay? So that's another thing you want to look for with the European cut glass. Let's look at this. And this is another thing you see a lot now. This is a lot of later European giftware. You see this type of thing, okay? This would date probably the 70s or after, okay? So these big designs here, these fans and this hop star in the middle, that's called a hop star or a whirling star. Sometimes people call them pinwheels. That's all pressed. But what stands out there? We see some gray. Look at the center of that hop star. There's a star there. And these lines, these thin lines here radiating off of that. And if we look very carefully, this is not even done well. It looks like there we go. How uneven that is. That almost looks like a child doing like a spirograph, okay? But it's also left gray. Left gray, it's European. There's the left, these are left gray. And the fact that it's not so precise tells me the quality is okay. It's quote unquote crystal. These were advertised as lead crystal. And they would say cut. They're not lying, it's cut, but it's not completely cut. This would have been a little more inexpensive. Okay, the quality is just not there like something like this that is completely cut. Oh, another thing I want to mention about this. Look at the little curly feet here. These feet are applied. Little curly applied feet. You're generally not going to see that on American Brilliant cut glass, okay? You might see it on other American glass, but you're not generally going to see it on American Brilliant, okay? Let's look at some Waterford now. Somebody asked about Waterford, okay? And here's another perfect example of smoothness. I'm rubbing my fingers on this, and the pressed glass on this table from the early 1900s is infinitely sharper than this. Somebody would come along and if they're just judging it by the feel, this is pressed. No, this is cut. I honestly don't know what this is. I think it might be part of a chandelier. If anybody knows, let me know. So it looks like a vase, but it's drilled, and I think it was originally drilled. I don't think somebody did that. And it actually has a Waterford mark on it along the side. Most Waterford is signed, but again, not all of it is. Okay, I have come across a couple pieces that I know are Waterford that are not signed, but Waterford is signed more than American cut glasses. So a lot of the Waterford patterns are these diamond patterns. A lot of the small, tiny diamonds, a lot of the larger diamonds, those are more popular European type of designs. Yeah, these other ones like this are European, but this is to imitate something earlier that was the style that Americans liked. Okay. So that is a piece of Waterford there. Very smooth, but same thing. Look at the miters, look at the points, look at the repeated diamonds. They should not be exactly even, and looking closely at this, they're not, okay? That does not symbolize bad quality, though. That is just how it is. And let's look at one more here. So this is a more modern rose bowl that is in the style of Waterford, I would say. Okay, it's got the larger diamond pattern to it, a little bit simpler, not quite as ornate. Now there's no gray cutting on this, nothing whatsoever. This is completely pressed. Now again, we're looking for seams and such. Whoa, very hard to see if there are seams on here. But another thing that I like to look for with pressed glass is what I call a soft star, softly molded star. We look at the star on the bottom, and this design, somebody call it a flower. That was something that a lot of cut glass started to have. So guess what pressed glass manufacturers did? Even early on, they started to put these stars in the bottom so people would think they were cut. But I call this the soft star because notice the petals. It's a very soft molding. When you look towards the center of it, there's nothing in the center. It kind of fades out towards the center. Whereas cut glass, all those points you're going to see are going to meet that center. And sometimes you're actually going to see a line go right through the center on cut glass because they were cut. Okay, this is obviously molded, and it's a soft star because it just the pressing is just not the best. Oh, there we can see it pretty good there. Look how fat and thick these points are, these rays are. Look towards the center. There's like nothing there. So not to say that a soft star always indicates a new piece. again, there are always exceptions to these indications and rules and such like that. But when you combine all those factors together, the shape, the base, everything put together, this is a piece of European pressed crystal, probably 1970s up till it could be from the year 2000. Again, a lot of these things were continue to be made as long as they're popular, they sell them. And that really just about wraps all this up. Are there any other questions that anybody wants to have me address? I think we really hit everything that's on this table. I'll just give it a little bit because I know there's a lag between. And as my assistant is looking for questions and such, I would just say I thank you all for joining. And this live stream will be archived here on YouTube. So a lot of people are telling me they weren't able to attend today; they had other things going. So I let them know that this is going to be archived. And everybody here, if you enjoyed this, please tell your friends, tell anybody you think might be interested. Post it on the glass boards, if that's allowed. But it will be here, so people can come back and you all can review this again. Somebody can view it for the first time tomorrow, next week, whatever. It should. I mean, things live on YouTube theoretically forever, so it should be here for quite a bit. So please recommend that to them. You could send them the direct link. If you go to the body of the broadcast here, there should be something that says share. If you use YouTube before, just click on share, and you can either share it via Facebook, you can copy the link, you can actually share it via email, etc. So there's many different ways to share it. So I would really appreciate if you would get the word out about this. Talking again, yes. Any questions?
What was the name of the pattern for that square cream pitcher?
Oh, yeah, I didn't talk about patterns. So this pattern was made by Bryce Brothers in the 1880s, and they call this Puritan. That's called Puritan, which again, I look at that and I say it is a variation, a copy of the Harvard cut glass design. Okay. What makes it Harvard, I should say. So we have this, it's like I said, it's like a cane pattern. This is a little variation, I say, because see there's diamonds on this row, and then it goes to an octagon, diamonds, and octagon, it alternates. Harvard is this X here, this fine X that alternates with buttons. Okay, plain buttons was the original Harvard pattern. Then we see variations on the Harvard pattern, which again, this one is cut. And then you also see where you have the Harvard cutting where they put stars in the middle of the, they just kind of made add a little extra cutting to it. But the general pattern of Harvard is this X with alternating octagons or hexagons. I think they're octagons. Yeah.
I have another question.
Yes.
Princess House Crystal.
Is Princess House Crystal? Yeah, I believe it is. I mean, I think they advertise it as that. So here's another thing. If they advertise it as that, that's what the manufacturer calls it. Whether it really is or not, we can't debate what the manufacturer called it. Okay, so if Princess House is Princess House Crystal, it is appropriate to refer to that as Princess House Crystal. Okay, now whether it actually has lead in it is another question. How much lead in it? Not all of this has the same amount of lead in it. Same thing with the pressed glass, the flint glass. Some of it rings at a higher pitch, and some of it resonates more because it has more lead in it. Okay, so there's different quality of lead crystal as well, or any glass that has lead in it. There's different qualities of soda lime glass as well. Okay, so that is something that I would think that if you refer to something as the manufacturer did, and you state that, originally called like Indiana Glass, called their reissues of their reproductions of Carnival glass in the early 70s. They called that Carnival glass. Some people say, well, that's not Carnival glass because Carnival glass is this early stuff. We cannot debate that Indiana Glass Company in 1972 called their reproductions of that stuff Carnival glass. So by their definition, that is Carnival glass. Whether collectors agree with that or not is another matter. Okay, so I kind of look at it as two things: original terminology, company-generated terminology, as opposed to collector-generated terminology. I want to talk about the drawing a little bit, okay? So I said that we're going to do a drawing for a piece of glass here. And I was looking around thinking, well, I love all of it, really, I love all of it, but what would I want to share with all of you? And I thought that it would be this Rose Bowl here. So this Rose Bowl, this is always a favorite one of mine. It is pressed, but it is a darn good pressing. Let me show it to you again. The light with the dark behind it. So this pattern was made by Cambridge Glass Company. Oh, just say around 1908, 1910. Okay, it's got a real nice hop-start pinwheel in the base. Really complex design, but there we go. It's very crisply molded, very well. It's not damaged or anything. I wouldn't send you anything that was damaged. Very nice piece of early American pattern glass, imitation for glass. So again, just to reiterate, if you do choose to send a virtual tip via PayPal, which I believe is in the links, the link is in the or Cash App. Make sure you include your email address. Okay. Make sure your name and email address is there again, so I have a way to contact you. So what I will do then is everybody there will have. I'm just going to write names on a piece of paper. Okay, I literally will do the drawing, but I will do the drawing live. Okay, just so y'all can feel like you're part of it. You don't have to tune in order to redeem the Rose Bowl. And if you don't send a tip, just send me an email with your name and email address. Okay, and let me know that you want to be part of the drawing. So I'm going to do the drawing, say 2 weeks from today. Okay, I'll set a time. I'm thinking right around the same time, maybe around 2 o'clock. It'll be live, but the same thing. It's going to be very short, and it will be archived as well if you want to go back and look at it. But the same bit though. Tell your friends. If you share this event with anybody, tell them exactly what I've told you, how to go about the drawing, and they will be eligible for it too. Okay. As long as I get, I either get the, I need their information by say the day before. So 2 weeks from today will be January 2nd, I believe. I would need their email address, their contact information. I'll need the address. Okay, just your contact information. I would need that by say January 1st, by the end of January 1st. Okay, and we have another question here.
So I have two questions. Jessica would like to know about cut to clear.
Okay.
And then Stephanie would like to know about your background and how you learned all this.
All right. So we'll go with the first question. Jessica would like to know about cut to clear. Okay. And as I did have one example here of cut to clear. So cut to clear, that's a great question, Jessica, because a lot of people confuse flashed glass with stained. Okay, and I'm looking around here to see if I have a piece of stained. Okay, looking in the cabinets here, I sent some stained ruby stain thing, says Secret Santa gifts. Oops, not Secret Santa anymore. Anyway, so I'm kind of low on that. But anyway, so this is clear glass, just like any of the other cut glasses here, and they would apply a thin layer. This is actually a thin layer of colored glass to it. It's not a stain. So staining is you would have the glass already molded. You're not going to find staining on cut glass like this. Okay, brilliant cut glass, rich cut glass. I think I failed to mention when this was first made, they called it rich cut glass, as opposed to lighter cuttings. Sorry, I'm getting off on a tangent. This would have been called a light cutting. Okay, rich cut glass. So they actually apply a very thin layer of glass to this, the whole thing. And then they cut away at that because it's such a thin layer. You're cutting through that layer of, in this case, it's green, and that's where you're getting all your cuts from. So that's why you have all the intricate background here. If this was stained, and the way they do this on stained glass, again, that would be pressed for the most part. It would be a molded item, and they would literally paint this transparent, let's just call it paint for now, just a transparent paint, a stain. They would fire it, and that would bond it to the glass because of the high temperature of refiring the glass. Okay, this was bonded to the glass because it's a separate layer. They also call it plating. If you think about it, plating makes absolute sense. Silver plate. You're taking a metal, you're taking a thin layer of another metal, in this instance silver, and you're bonding them together through whatever means you want to. Not an expert on any of that. Very, very similar. You're taking a very, very thin layer of glass and you're bonding it to another. And then you're cutting through. The appeal to that is, again, seeing the base color. Sometimes mostly the base color is clear. So you have, this would be referred to as clear, green cut to clear, blue cut to clear, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. But sometimes the base glass color, base glass was colored. It's a little less common. You see that a lot more in European examples. Okay. And I hope that helped. I hope that answered your question. And then the other question was,
What's your background?
my background and how did I learn about this stuff? Yeah, I've been doing this stuff since I was literally a child. I was about 11 years old and I discovered depression glass. I collected coins. And that was the days of the card catalog. And, in order to find a book, you pulled out the card catalog and you looked up the Dewey Decimal number, right? How many of y'all remember that? Raise your hand. So by that I knew where the coin books were. There was a certain sequence of numbers, so I knew which aisle they were. Okay. So one day I was at the library, and I was probably about 10 or 11 years old, and I went down the wrong aisle, or maybe they shifted stuff around. They did that every now and then. And I was looking around, and I saw a book, Colored Glassware of the Depression Era. I do not know to this day what caused me to even pick that up, because you're just seeing the binding of it. I was looking for my coin books. I picked the book up and I started looking through it. I was amazed at all these patterns, but what really, really got me was that you could date a pattern just by the design. You could date this glass just by this pattern on the glass. And I just thought that was so interesting. And being a kid, I thought I was like part of some sort of secret society. I literally thought that I was like, the only one who would know this. So then when I would go to a flea market, I could go to a dealer and find a piece of glass that I knew was from between 1930 and 1937, but they wouldn't. Coins are dated. So it's an old coin, it's expensive. So to me, that was like really, really cool. So from there, I started to explore even earlier glass. And I followed the late Bill Heacock a lot. He was, if any of you know, Bill Heacock was a researcher and author. And I think he was a pretty awesome researcher. He didn't always get everything right, but his research came from the heart. And if he made a mistake, he always said something. If he found information later on that negated what he said, he mentioned it. Great role model. And I came to realize that I got more excited about seeing catalog reprint, actually old catalog engravings rather than the actual glass. I was probably about 16 or 17 at that time, a little younger. There was a woman at a flea market my grandmother and I used to go to. It was at a senior center. And so it was really informal. We had some dealers, but it was mostly just the residents there, the senior citizens coming out to conference. So you had like lots of depression glass and some older glass for, nickel, dime, 25 cents. I mean, $5 was expensive. But there was a woman there that was a resident, and her daughter, her name was Kathy, and she gave me two publications, William Heacock's The Glass Collector, because she had gotten them. And somehow she must have seen this in me. She said, I thought you might like these. And I just kind of looked at them like, oh, okay. I got home and I looked through those things and I was like, oh my gosh. So I think I was born to be a researcher. I feel I was born to be a teacher as well. Just from a very young age, I always enjoyed helping people, and I always enjoyed leading people and mentoring people and helping them learn stuff. So that was just always part of me. And in my 20s, I got even more into it, and I really started to delve into the original sources. So I'm looking at a book of what somebody is saying, and there's a certain part of me that wants to see what they're seeing. So I would go to research libraries, and I would go to the local library downtown, and I would get interlibrary loan for microfilm and stuff like that. And I have most people call it a photographic memory. I guess you can call it that, but it has to do with sequences where I can literally look at these crazy, crazy patterns, and I can tell you exactly which one it is. And this one's different from that one because of this. It's all about sequences. Okay. So that really, that ability to organize the patterns and know the patterns in my head and have that recall that just comes to me very naturally without studying. I just kind of look at it and it just kind of absorbs. That led me even further to doing more of this. And I should have even had a copy of my book here to show you. I didn't.
The link
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I did write a book on Bryce, Higbee and Company. It's talking about that specific company, but a lot of the stuff I told you today about, the manufacturing techniques, the way they marketed stuff, what Victorians used this stuff for. That's another question people always want to know. What did they use this for 150 years ago? Well, I'll tell you. There's two answers to that question, really. Again, we look at it two ways. Our modern senses about like what we feel it might have been meant to, what it could be used for. Well, this is a sponge cup. Okay, great. No, that's an ice cream dish. Okay, well, great. But what did the manufacturer call it? That's what I want to know. Okay, so we got two different things there. We got what the manufacturer called it, and we have what people back then might have used it for. They didn't necessarily use it for what the manufacturer sold it for. And people nowadays might not use it for what the manufacturer, intended for. So I talk about a lot of that in my book as well. So it is about Bryce, Higbee and Company, but there is a lot more to it. Dining customs in the Victorian period, styles and patterns and all the Bryce Higbee patterns. So that was a little long-winded, sorry, but I hope you learned a little bit about me.
I have one last question to wrap up.
Okay.
Is a blacklight a reliable test?
Okay. Is a black light a reliable test? A reliable test for what? What are we looking for? So let's just talk about that briefly. Something glows like a very bright glow to it. In fact, you probably all know what it looks like. I mean, I could show you, but hold on a second. Yeah. All right. I'll indulge. All right. Well, it might not be. There we go. Wow. Okay. Yeah, that really glows like a lot. Okay. So that is showing that there is something in this glass, an element in this glass that is, you probably even see it like this. It's an element in this glass that is causing that bright neon glow. But then also clear glass will have, and this isn't going to show up for you, but I see just a very light glow, like a dull, maybe celery kind of color. So this really bright glow like that's very popular right now. Okay, and people will call it uranium glow. There's a lot of things that can make glass glow different things. Okay, I have a red glass compote over there that will glow as well, but it's a different color. So the glowing has to do with the elements that are in the glass, and in this case, that really bright glow is uranium. Okay, uranium. It's not going to hurt you. It's in the glass. It's not. Don't worry about that. People also wonder, oh, is it going to hurt me? It's not radioactive. I mean, I read years ago this was true. They might have different criteria now, but if you walked around with a Fiesta, was it the orange glaze strapped to your chest, which had like uranium or whatever, and strapped to your chest for 20 years, you're not going to even get this much radiation. Okay, whatever. You don't got to worry about this. So uranium is in this, but it is also in a lot of green glass, and green glass made during the Depression era has uranium in it as well. But in order to call it Vaseline, we're getting on a whole other subject here, and I'll do another seminar for this too, but just to kind of whet your appetite. Uranium is in this. It's yellow. It's Vaseline. Back in the day when this was made, they called it canary. Okay. But as for this stuff, as for the clear stuff, your cut glass, your American brilliant cut glass is not going to glow with what they call from the manganese dioxide in it. Your pressed glass is, because there's not manganese dioxide in that glass. Okay, there's manganese dioxide in a lot of the pressed glass. Again, it was a clarifying agent. It was so the glass was clear, was not a kind of like a dullish kind of bodily kind of green color. Okay, so in a nutshell, that has to do. It doesn't necessarily determine age. A lot of people say, well, it's old because it glows. There's glass that was made yesterday in China that glows. Okay. There's glass that was made 100 years ago that glows. Point of all this, we don't rely on simply one test to determine what something is or what something isn't. Okay, we have a whole criteria. We have a whole bunch of factors, a bunch of criteria that we have a checklist. Okay, yeah, meets this. If it walks like a duck and smells like a duck, yeah, it's a duck. Okay, have your checklist. You have a big checklist now. If you're writing all this stuff down, or even going back and seeing what all of the characteristics can be. And again, one piece is not going to exhibit every single characteristic. It's the same thing with the glowing glass. Okay, so my final comment and my final suggestion to you is do not rely on just one thing. Okay, have a skeptical mind. It's great to be skeptical. It's great to look at other factors. It's good that it's good to question yourself even. Okay, so it's sharp. It's cut glass. Let's look a little further. Look for the miters. Look for the points. Look for the regular design. You can even do the little flick test too. Put that all together, then come to your determination. Do not rely on one single factor. So I hope you all have enjoyed this seminar. And again, if you care to leave the tip in the jar, I very much appreciate it. And look forward to future seminars from me. Another thing I will invite you to do too is you can email me and let me know, how you like this. And also let me know if there's a certain topic you would like to see discussed. And I can go further on these. And I can make them shorter. I can possibly make them longer. I can do them a little more often. Okay, different types of things. But let me know what you would like to see. Okay. And I thank you very much for joining us today. Do this on.